So good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Dave Mason, and my title here at the high school is Dean of Curriculum and Instruction. And I started here in 2008 as a social studies teacher after teaching in other very different environments for a number of years, about 12 years before I came to Cristo Rey and joined this mission. And since then, I've held administrative positions in the school here, and I'm obviously currently back here in that role, and I also get to teach an elective class, which is a lot of fun, because I would never want to give that up in a million years. And then the last 2 years, I had an amazing opportunity to go work at the Cristo Rey Network offices in Chicago, supporting all of our 26 different schools all across the country. And it was an absolutely amazing experience, just from a macro level and from an organizational standpoint. What's so amazing about that is that I had an opportunity to travel, visit every school in the network, and every city, New York, Kansas City, Portland, LA, there are supervisors just like you, and some national partner companies as well in other cities. They're working with our young people, and there are also educators in the schools, just like what's happening here this morning. They're getting ready to start the day. This is a huge movement, and to be a part of that is just an amazing thing, and I don't know that I always stopped and really thought about that when I was just in my day-to-day here in Minneapolis, and then to go and see it on the grand scale and see kids and supervisors and teachers and board members, lay people, clergy, all of these amazing people working together, just absolutely amazing. So it's a real honor for me to come and meet with you this morning and talk a little bit about an underlying goal of ours, an ambitious goal, and that is to break the cycle of poverty. And I think sometimes we don't always really stop and think about a lot of the situations that our students come from. And more importantly, the mindsets that a lot of our students bring to the classroom every day and to the workplace every day. And a lot of those mindsets come from the circumstances that our students were put into. And so we're going to talk about that today. It's really exciting. I want to just mention the book that we're going to dig into a little bit today. And the reason that we're digging into this book, A Framework for Understanding Poverty by Ruby Payne, is that this book is really used all across the Cristo Rey network to really try to understand the mindsets of individuals that come from poverty and identify some leverage points and how we can help with that on a daily basis. So I've already spoken with Chris and Meg and her team, and what's great about this is if you decide, if the feedback is such that we would like to know more about this going forward, this is really just part one today, and you'll take away some very practical knowledge from this today. So this is really used across the network, this book, and I've done some trainings along these lines before. But a really key point before we get started is that I think one of the misconceptions is that people say, oh, well, if you haven't lived it yourself, then how can you possibly help someone that comes from this situation? I was brought up in a middle-class household, and for most of my teaching career, I taught in a very different environment, very high-performing middle-class high school, where the expectation was that students would go to college. It was just plain and simple. That's what was going to happen. Now this is a very different situation, and so I've studied it and learned about it, and many teachers in our schools and many supervisors in the workplace have also studied and learned about it, and have really been able to make a difference. So don't worry if your background doesn't fit with some of the students or this book. You can learn about it and really make a difference in students' lives. So I want to point out that this is just one framework. It says a framework for understanding poverty. There are other frameworks. This happens to be the framework that is widely used across the Cristo Rey network. So Something else about our workshop today, and I do call it a workshop, it will be interactive. That's why I asked you to have a partner. You're going to get a chance to have some conversations with someone next to you and strategize a little bit and think about your daily work with students. And we will do some writing, we will do some talking and processing from time to time throughout the presentation. It won't just be me up here talking, because I want to model what we practice here in the school, and that is active learning. So hopefully we're all ready to do that and dig in. So we always have a learning objective every day in our classroom, whether it's science, math, religious studies, social studies. And our learning objective for this session this morning is to be able, by the time the session is over, to articulate key points about the culture of poverty and implications for our work with students at school and the workplace. So hopefully by the time this is finished today, you'll have some things to think about and some major takeaways. But let's dig in first. What I'm going to ask you to do is do a little exercise. We call this in the classroom an activator. So I'll ask you to, each of you individually, peel off 5 Post-it notes from your little Cristo Rey stack of Post-it notes there on your table. We normally don't burn through trees like this, but this is a special occasion, so. And what I will ask you to do is individually, just write down this, by the way, this activator is called 5 words, 3 words, so our teachers use it in the classroom to activate knowledge or prior knowledge before teaching, and you're actually doing it right now. It's kind of exciting. So I'm going to ask you to write down 5 words that come to mind when you think of poverty. Just right off the top of your head, 5 words on your 5 individual Post-it notes. So if you do that individually. I still see a few pens, pencils moving. That's okay. Take a few seconds, a minute to finish up. And when you have done that, what I'll ask, and it's okay if you don't have 5, just 4, 3, whatever comes to mind. I'll ask you to go ahead and turn to your partner. Hopefully we have even numbers here at tables, and if you have to have a group of 3, that's okay. But I think, just looking around, I think we're good. If you could compare your words, share those with your partner, and then together pick the 3 Post-it notes or the 3 words that you feel capture your ideas regarding poverty. Thank you for doing that. As I walked around the room, I heard a lot of commonality at the tables, and we are starting to dig into the way we're thinking about it right now, and what we observe on a daily basis, and what we're bringing to the table as far as our prior knowledge. Would there be any brave individual that would be willing to share their 3 words? Remind me. Janelle, sorry. Janelle.
Misunderstood. Respect.
Misunderstood, respect, and hungry. Any similarities at other tables out there? We won't have a bunch of people share out. Thank you, by the way. But I want you to keep in mind that you're going to hear things that are similar, and there are patterns that we'll start to recognize. And we're going to start to dig a little bit deeper now. So if you go into your pile of materials, you'll notice underneath your slides, there is actually a paper that looks like this. It says The Hidden Rules Among Classes. And this is right from Chapter 3 in Ruby Payne, a framework for understanding poverty. And there are 3 quizzes in there, and it's pretty interesting. You can read the front before you take the quiz, but it has to do with sort of these hidden rules regarding classes. And so these quizzes are, could you survive in poverty? Could you survive in middle class? Could you survive in wealth? So take a moment and just check off on those quizzes the things that you are able to do, and see how well you would do in the 3 different economic classes. you are finished, the next step is to actually share your results with your partner and see how you would do in the 3 classes. There are some key takeaways. I'll let you have a conversation first. So how did everyone do? How many people, let's start with the easy one. How many people could survive in middle class? Right, not too bad. How about wealth? How do we do?
I mean, I think I can figure it out.
You would be okay with being a test run?
Yeah.
Take a test run on the... Okay, we'll arrange that. We'll see what we can do about that. How about poverty? How would people be able to do okay in poverty? There's usually always a few that would be able to survive. And oftentimes we actually experience it on some level, which we're going to get to here in just a minute. You know, it's interesting, from the school standpoint, I look through a lot of these, and you know, one that always really jumps out at me when it comes to the school is number 10, where it says, could you survive in the middle class? I know how to help my children with their homework, and do not hesitate to call the school if I need additional information. This is a real challenge for a lot of our parents. We're doing college prep work here. It can be very, very challenging when you're trying to work, multiple jobs, let alone even if you had the time to help a student, to be able to actually have the knowledge base to do so. It's a very frustrating thing to not be able to help your student with their homework, something that a lot of us in middle class take for granted. Although my dad had a real hard time helping me with my math homework. So we think about those things, or even contacting the school. Who do I talk to when I get to the school? And it can be a very, very uncomfortable thing to navigate this process. And that's just one example. But I want you to keep the survey in mind, because we'll come back to it when we talk a little bit more about social class and how people can move in between classes, economic classes. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But this has a lot of implications for our students. Was it yesterday or the day before? I had a very, very completely real conversation with a student, and another student was right at the end of the day, and another student said, what are you doing today after school? And she said, I got to get all my stuff out of my mom's house and move it over to my dad's house. Said it with a smile on her face, no issue, no problem. I've got plastic bags, I'm going to fill them up, and I'm going to walk 4 miles from my mom's house to my dad's house. And I said, it was snowing and sleeting outside. I said, well, she said, I have my bus cards out. It's no big deal. It's only 4 miles. And she was going to put her clothes in the bags, put all her stuff in the bags, and move from one parent's house to the other. And just didn't say it with any, it was not upset about it. She was actually smiling, and it's no big deal. I got to get that done, though. I got to take care of it. So we don't always think about those types of things that are daily realities for a lot of our kids. They bring that to school, they bring that to the workplace, and sometimes it's not evident, or we don't always see it in their actions. So Ruby Payne developed this work, basically thinking of it as a cognitive study of the mindsets that are created when you live in an environment. And that kind of gets to the survey that we'll talk about. So if you grew up in middle class, you have a different mindset. If you grew up in wealth, you have a different mindset. If you grew up in poverty, you have a different mindset. And it has to do with your environment. Now, this is relevant for us because as educators and work supervisors, this is a challenge, breaking mindsets, right? So helping students, helping them understand that your mindset is not fixed. And I'll talk more about a really great book later that you could read yourself to learn more about the fixed mindset or the open mindset or the growth mindset that we have to actually teach. So besides teaching arithmetic, besides teaching Excel spreadsheets, besides teaching all of this college prep curriculum, we're actually teaching students how to approach their daily work in both places in terms of their mindset. So that's a very different thing, and it's profound. So the first key point, and just so you know, I copied the slide notes for everyone, and if you want to jot notes in your note page, you can. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just articulate and let us work through Ruby Payne's, really her 13 or a dozen key points regarding the mindsets of social class, economic class, and poverty. And once we have that understanding, it will impact the work we're able to do going forward with our students. So her first big point is poverty is relative in comparison to others, right? So think about this for a minute to illustrate this point. If you earned your current salary here in Minneapolis and you were suddenly plunked down in Manhattan in New York, would you be in middle class, would you be in wealth, or would you be in poverty? Or San Francisco, or another very expensive city? When you talk to wealthy people, they say, well, there's always someone who has more than I do. There's always someone who's more wealthy. Oh, it's all on paper anyway. It's very relative. It's a very relative thing, right? In terms of, think of your mindset when you first finished college. You're trying to pay back loans and things like that. Or when you were in college, eating top ramen every night. Those types of things, right? So it impacts the way you approach things, and it's experienced on a very personal level. But here in America, it's a very different thing than in the developing world. Here, poverty is relative because people in poverty have a variety of resources that they can turn to. Poverty in the developing world is absolute. 30,000 people die a day in the developing world from hunger and poverty. Every day, 30,000 people die. And so that's absolute poverty. Relative poverty is what our students experience. It's a very different thing than absolute poverty. And so there is a difference when we think about that in terms of resources. So people that live in poverty have a variety of resources that they can turn to, but it doesn't make it any easier. Now this is really interesting. When we look at her key point number 2, generational and situational poverty. Situational poverty is someone in the family, the primary breadwinner, dies or passes away, and suddenly there's a period where the family doesn't have the money or the resources, or that example I used a minute ago, you're in college, you hardly have any money. When I was student teaching and fresh out of college, I had $500 in my bank account or whatever it was, and I thought I was wealthy. It was a very, very different thing. But this line of social class is not necessarily fixed. So what's interesting is that, for generational poverty, it's when you live in poverty for 2 or more generations. So that's the only thing you know, is living in poverty. When you've been brought up and it's in generation after generation, that's a very different thing than situational poverty. We just had, the last few years, a challenging economic time. A lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of people were out of work, they lost their homes, things like that. That's situational poverty. It's still difficult. But then we have middle class, new money, and old money. Now, what's interesting is if you're to move from new money to old money, or middle class to new money, there are rules in all of these different steps along the way. And so the key takeaway here is if you're going to move from situational poverty to middle class, you have to use some of the rules or the mindset in situational poverty, but then you also have to learn the new rules of the middle class. It's the same thing to move from middle class to new money or new money to old money. It takes a period of time to move, and generally speaking, it's about 3 generations. So we think of it this way, and this is a quote by Dr. Samuel Bentensis. It takes 3 generations in a country as an unskilled immigrant to get college educated. So think of it this way. Parents immigrate, they work really hard, multiple jobs, their kids get a high school education. And then their grandkids, if they're lucky, get a college education. Now what we're trying to do is actually reduce that. So a lot of the students that we're working with right now in school and in the workplace, these are students that ordinarily, if you just look at this quote and think about this, they would just be content to graduate from high school. But what we're doing is their parents have newly immigrated to the country in many instances, not in all instances. But we're saying you have an opportunity now to actually do it in 2 generations rather than 3 generations. Now, it's an audacious task, but that's one of the things we're trying to do. And not just immigrants, people that have lived in poverty in our local community, generational poverty, for multiple generations, it's the same thing. We're trying to break that right away and send students to college to get college educated. And their experience in the workplace has a lot to do with that. And I'll talk more about that in just a second. So we have to be careful, and Ruby Payne really makes a point to hammer this home, and that is that this is a cognitive approach to class, and it's based on patterns of thinking, and all patterns have exceptions, right? We know what when stereotyping happens. It occurs when patterns of a group are applied to everyone within that group. We can't do that. We know that with our kids that we work with every single day, because there are exceptions to every rule. So we're studying the patterns of a particular group. So if we go back and we look at the patterns of middle class or the patterns of generational poverty, obviously there are exceptions to every rule. So to not think of it that way would be a misuse of the work. And Ruby Payne really points that out if you go on and read more about Ruby Payne. Now here is an opportunity. I've just spoken at you for a while, and I want you to take a minute and process. Most schools and businesses operate from middle class norms and values. Notice I use a little green box down here, and a lot of teachers use this in the classroom so that students know it's a subtle cue. Every time there's a green box, that means that they're going to be doing something. So in a PowerPoint, they say, ooh, the green box. What are we going to do? We're going to do a turn and talk or a think, pair, share. So it says, what implications does this have for Cristo Rey students who spend a significant number of hours each week here at school, where we operate primarily from middle class values, and in the workplace, where we operate primarily from middle class norms? What are the implications of that for our students, that for their mindset and where they're coming from, this can be an immense challenge for them? So think about that for a minute, and when you've thought through that, what that looks like, or the implications for the work we do, share that with a partner, and it may look different depending on where you are, where you work. All right. I know that we could talk about this for a long time, and certainly have a lot of discussions. One of the things that Chris and Meg and I have talked about is finding a time for teachers to join us, because we really feel there's a lot of value in getting people together. I know one of the most valuable experiences I have every year is when I have the opportunity to go visit a student in the workplace. There's nothing like it, and oftentimes a student excels at work that struggles mightily in school. And sometimes vice versa. A student might be a very good student at school and maybe has difficulties. So I think the more we can do that, the better. Nate, I heard you had a lot to, Nate, right? You had a lot to share over there. What implications does this have for you in the work you do with your students, the fact that most schools and businesses operate on middle class norms and values?
I just talked about it kind of, if they're coming into it with a poverty mindset, coming more into the workplace, where we definitely function more of a middle class to maybe sometimes wealthy upper class. I can see the real challenge for them going to school in more of a middle class environment, potentially trying to help them bridge the gap from the generational poverty and lifestyle. All the challenges that might incorporate. We talked about how hard it must be for their family and parents if they don't really have an education or maybe the language or whatever that might look like, resources to help their students. They don't even know probably what the plan or approach should be helping.
Right, it's that idea of support. Now, we give a lot of support. The teachers, thank you, Nate. Those are all really important points. So the support we give in the workplace and the support we give in school, we have to fill the gaps. As Nate said, parents can't always provide that, or they don't know how, and so they're putting that trust in us. And there are a lot of challenges that come with this. And so as we go forward, this notion that individuals bring with them what we call the hidden rules of class in which they were raised, a lot of times it's really subtle. We don't even think about it. So there are hidden rules with everything, right? So here's a great example with food. So So think about food for a minute. There are hidden rules with food. Generally speaking, and again, this isn't everyone in the group, but when you think about poverty, the questions about food are, did you get enough to eat? Are you still hungry, right? Not necessarily what it is, but are you full? You know, are you leaving the dinner table hungry, right? So very different mindset. Middle class, and again, I'm thinking of some friends of mine actually, but in middle class we have more food than we need a lot of times. The refrigerator is full, and we're always on different diets and things. I have this friend of mine who's on the gluten-free diet, you know. Oh, is it gluten-free? Can't have gluten, you know. But this idea of I can only eat this, I can only eat that, I only shop at Whole Foods or this and that, right? So there's plenty of food, and oftentimes there's food that gets thrown away, or if I don't like it, I won't eat it, right? Ooh, I don't like that. I'm just gonna, and it gets scraped away. And then in wealth, it's very much how is it presented? Is it paired with the right wine? Is it paired? Is the dessert, does that go with the entree, and the courses, the various courses and things like that, right? So there are hidden rules when it comes to food. We had a student here a few years ago who got in trouble at work because he was just going into the refrigerator and he thought anything in the refrigerator was up for grabs. And he was a nice kid. And he went in there and he was just grabbing any brown bag that he saw. And he was like, today I had this great sandwich. And someone was losing this. We're not going to name any names. This is a couple years ago. A young man that I really, really liked and appreciated. Well, he got in big trouble. But the way he grew up, he came from a big family and he came from poverty. And the way he grew up was if there was something in the fridge, you grabbed it. You ate it. And, you know, because there wasn't going to be anything there. And so he went to the workplace, and then what's interesting about our school, you'll notice that down on the second floor, if you take a tour of our school, we just have refrigerators where you can bring and you can put your things in there, but we teach that rule, that you don't just grab any, well, does it happen? Yeah, it still happens from time to time. But those are the types of hidden rules we're talking about that we don't always think about, right? Because we know it's labeled, it's mine, it's, you know, Joe's from accounting. I'm not going to eat that. Right? But some of our students don't have that because of the hidden rules where they come from are different than the hidden rules of where they're going into. And that school can be the same thing, right? So just things to think about. So the middle class misconception is if the poor had a choice, they would live differently. And we hear that from time to time. And here's the key. We must teach new patterns, new skills, and rules that allow the individual to make the choice. Right? It boils down to choice. But if you don't know the rules to be able to navigate, if you don't know the hidden rules, if you don't have an understanding, then you're unable to navigate and you're unable to make the choice. Not everyone wants to be middle class, because people say middle class, what's middle class? But everyone wants the financial security that comes with middle class. Right? So if people don't have the choice, then they won't be able to move. And so we have to teach, we have to educate. We're going to get more in depth into that in a minute. Think about this, 40% of Americans live in the class that they were born into. 40%, that's still pretty high. If you're born into a class, that's where you stay. 40% of those people stay there. So if you don't have choice, it's very, very difficult. So there are hidden rules about time and money. There are hidden rules about everything. We talked about food. But think about these for a minute. Poverty, the rules, generally speaking, regarding time and money. Now, this is key, especially with the work in the workplace and the school. In poverty, you're thinking about survival. And I saw some people that actually wrote some of these words on their Post-its earlier. Survival, relationships, and entertainment are the primary rules about time and about money. Middle class, it's about work, achievement, and material security. And in wealth, generally political connections, financial connections, and social connections. So again, we're generalizing here about the group, but this is the research that Ruby Payne conducted and came up with here. And so how does this play out in the workplace? So think about these rules for a minute, especially middle class, where those are the rules of work and school. Think about the rules with regards to time and money and the implications for student performance in the workplace. So I'll give you just an example here in a minute. So a student goes to work or a student goes to school and they've been evicted. The family's been evicted. Is it easy for them to concentrate at school and work? Probably not. Relationships are a really big deal, and we're going to dig into this more. So a student's best friend is texting them and they're at work. Right? They shouldn't have their phone on, we know that. They shouldn't be getting any texts or emails or things like that, we know that. But their best friend is something has happened, their parents kicked them out or something like that. There's an immense obligation when it comes to relationships. Friends outside on the corner, the friends skipping school. Hey, meet me during your lunch hour down here, you know. You don't have to go back to work. Let's go for an hour. Let's take off. You're torn between that friend that you've known for a long, long time, and you know, we know that that's not right to do that, but these are the types of challenges that we're facing. And then if work achievement and material security aren't necessarily something that you can even see in the future or really comprehend or fully understand, which we get at school and in the workplace, then it's a very difficult thing for a student to be successful. So think about that for a minute, and I'm going to ask that you have another very short conversation about these hidden rules and what that might mean in the workplace. All right. So when it comes to decision making, our students and their families have to make decisions, important decisions every day, just like everyone has to make important decisions every day. But when you're in poverty, your decision making hones you in on survival. If you don't have enough food to eat, that's going to take priority. If you don't have a place to live, that's going to take priority. If you don't have heat, that's going to take priority. Relationships with people that have been loyal to you over time, those are very, very important. And generally speaking, and this is probably the biggest idea to take away from today, is that these relationships can be used as leverage, or they can be detrimental to or get in the way of success or breaking this idea of poverty. So this is the challenge, and this is every day in the classroom, and this is every day in the workplace. We can neither excuse nor scold students. We have to teach our students. And what I mean by that is there are two sets of rules. There are rules in the workplace and there are rules in school. And it can be as simple as this. If you play football, you don't play by the same rules as when you play basketball. Well, I've known a couple people that aren't sure about that. But in football, you don't play by the same rules as in basketball. So if someone in basketball tackles another person every time they get the ball, they're not going to last very long. And you won't win that way, right? You'll foul out of the game immediately. There are different sets of rules in sports, just like there are different sets of rules in the workplace than there are in the neighborhood, different sets of rules at school. And so we have to actually explicitly teach our students what these rules look like. We have to model it and we have to teach it, and that's how we can help our students. And I think oftentimes the mistake that's made is that we excuse behavior or let our students off the hook. We have to have high expectations for our students, but we can't just say, you blew it, without saying, here's why that was wrong. For me to have that conversation with that student who took the sack lunch out of the refrigerator, naturally I might be upset, and I might say, that was wrong, and I might scold or be upset with that student, but I have to stop and I have to think, this is a teachable moment, and I have to teach that there are different sets of rules here, and we just simply cannot do that here, and here's why. And once the student understands that, generally, they do very, very well. It's a similar misconception. I've heard a lot of people say, you take students from poverty that are multiple grades behind in every subject, and they behave like this in classroom, quiet, focused, engaged. Yeah, absolutely, because we teach that from the moment they set foot here, that these are the expectations and the rules of the school. Now, it may be different outside and it may be different in the neighborhood, but here, these are the rules that we engage with, and these are the expectations that we have. So we cannot excuse that, and we have to teach them. So think for a minute about an opportunity, or perhaps a missed opportunity, in your interaction with a student in the workplace, where you might have been able to have that conversation, or perhaps you're about ready to have that conversation with a student about different sets of rules in the workplace and different sets of rules outside the workplace. I'm sure everyone has at least one moment that they can think of where they've had to have a conversation about that. What I would ask is that you keep this idea of teachable moment in your mind. I was looking, I don't know how many people know, well, the corporate work study team back there, the other day I actually watched the video of this too. I don't know how many know Rob Truesdale back there. Wave your hand, Rob. Rob works on the corporate work study team. And he was having what we call a retraining session with a student who had not done very well at work. And he modeled this to a T, and I know the whole corporate work study team does this. And I watched the video that he sent to me, which was what we call a presentation of learning of this student. So the student basically gave a presentation about where he went wrong in the workplace. And he talked about not always understanding the expectations, but he also talked about how there were times when he did understand and didn't follow through or follow the rules of the workplace. And it was a remarkable thing to watch the retraining of this student. And maybe at some point in another one of these we can, I don't know if we can show the video or not, but what's amazing about it is just the patience that the teachers and the supervisors and the corporate work study team show with, it goes back to that not scolding, not berating, but simply teaching our students, these are the rules, and this is what they look like, and this is how you could be successful. This is how you can be successful here, and this is how you can be successful at school. And it looks like this. So think of those teachable moments, don't let them out of your mind, and when you get an opportunity, use that opportunity and leverage it to teach the student, because it will make a difference. The big idea, number 9, is probably one of the largest overall, and it's this idea that to move from poverty to middle class, for a time period, you have to give up relationships for achievement. Now, some people say that's simply not true, but I see it here all the time. Oh, well, my friends at the public school, they don't have to do all that work. They get out at 2 o'clock. I don't have to, they don't have to go work one day a week, and I'd rather go hang out with them. Or I'd rather skip school and go do this or that with my friends. Or there might be a relative, per se, that this student or this worker might really look up to, but this person's not a good influence. Generally speaking, they will not turn away from that relationship. It's a very painful thing to have to turn away from some of these friends, people that you've known for a long, long time, in order to go to this Cristo Rey school where you have to wear that uniform every single day, go to work one full day a week. I met with a student, it would break your heart. I met with a student at another Cristo Rey school when I worked at the network, who talked to me about her experience going home at the end of the day, and would be berated by other people in her family and say, you think you're special because you go to that job every day in that office building downtown? Just because you have a job, you think you're better than us? Think you're better than your brother and your sister? Dropped out, went to public school? So every day, she didn't get a chance to feel good about the work she did. Because she would go to work, she did what she was supposed to, she'd go to school, she did what she was supposed to, and she would go home and have to deal with this every single day. And it's very, very sad. Think about the hill that she has to climb to get to college. Because she's doing everything she's asked to, but the people that she loves, her family, is not necessarily buying in. Well, they're sending her to the school, or she's going to the school, but, you know, it could be a very, very painful thing. So those relationships and sacrificing those relationships for achievement can be a very, very difficult thing. And so those conversations are important. And the two things that help people move out of poverty are education, which we're providing in the workplace and at school, and relationships. So we're building relationships here at school, and we're building relationships with our students at the workplace. And it is amazing. I know you don't always get a chance to hear it, but I hear all the time about supervisors and the impact that you make on students' lives. Because we'll have conversations with students, we'll say, well, who's a great person? Oh, my supervisor, or this person that I work with in the workplace, or this teacher. And so every single student that you meet that's successful can name one person in their Cristo Rey life, whether it's at work or at school, who's made an impact or influenced them. And so those relationships, that idea of leveraging those relationships, will go well beyond your imagination. It's really, the stories that I've heard over the years about kids and the influence of the adults at Cristo Rey and at work are amazing. So the number one reason adults choose not to leave poverty, to stay, even when they're presented with opportunities, is because of relationships, either negative or positive. So the 4 reasons people leave poverty are these: it's too painful to stay, a vision or goal, a key relationship, or a special talent or skill. This is your time. This is where it comes into play. So take a look at these 4 and think about the corporate work study program. A student never thought about a career in law or a career in banking or a career in the medical field. Goes to work. And now they have a vision or goal, number 2. I would love to do this. I would love to be a lawyer. I would love to go to law school. I would love to go into banking and get a degree in finance. Now they have a vision or goal that'll play into lifting them from poverty. A key relationship, I just mentioned, a teacher, a supervisor, a work colleague, or a special talent or skill. How many of our students find that special talent or skill in the workplace? Even if they're not being successful at school. This is what makes this program so incredible. I see it all the time. A student struggles mightily at school, they're unbelievably successful in the workplace. And I can go there and I see it for myself, and I can't believe it. Some of the kids that I go see, this is the same kid. This is incredible. Can't sit still, have a hard time focusing in class, go to the workplace, tasks, asking people what they need, just incredible. And it's just hard to imagine. But those 3, vision or a goal, a key relationship, or a special talent and skill, how many of those materialize during a student's corporate work study experience? So think about that for a minute, and just think about some ways that you might do one of the following. Help a student worker develop a vision or goal, enhance your relationship with the student worker, or help a student identify a special talent or skill in the workplace. Because those 3 things, if you have an opportunity to do any of those 3, it will help a student get out of poverty. Think about that for a minute, and then we'll do another quick turn and talk. And right on time at 9, and we're doing very well. I would love to give you more time to talk this through, and I'd love to actually hear what some people have to say about this, but what I'll ask for now is that you keep that in mind, because every day when that student shows up at work, there's an opportunity, and in so many instances, when things aren't going well at school, it's this idea of what's happening in the workplace, of vision or goal or key relationship or special skill or talent that really lifts that student. So think about that. And when we think about the motivation for learning, So what is the student's motivation to do well at school and work? It could be different. But so often, in so many cases, time and time again, I've seen students at school that I've taught or others have taught where they want to succeed purely because of their love and appreciation and admiration for that adult or that key relationship in their life. I'm sick as a dog, but I'm going to go to work because I don't want to let my supervisor down. It's a big project I have to do. And I would never dream of letting them down. Or no matter what, I'm going to make sure I do well in algebra class because I love my algebra teacher and I don't want my algebra teacher to be disappointed in me. It goes back to the relationships. And conversely, believe it or not, and I don't know if this is played out in the workplace, but I imagine that it probably has, the idea that where there's an issue with a teacher or an issue with a student, I have seen a student that is perfectly capable of doing extremely well sabotage herself to get back at the teacher because the student knows what'll hurt that teacher the most is if I don't do well. Even though it sabotages their own high school performance. And this student put their name on a test and turned it in, just with their name, because they knew that they could get that teacher back by doing that. They made up later, but this idea of, I really love that person, and I know the way I can hurt that person is if I don't do well, I intentionally fail. And I would imagine this occasionally plays out in the workplace too, where students says, I'm just intentionally not going to do well or not succeed. And it's hard for us to even imagine or fathom it, but it goes back to the relationship piece. That key relationship can be turned to positive, and if it goes sour, it can be a very terrible thing. And so just keep that in mind as we go forward. Dr. James Comer is an African-American educator at Yale University, and his research shows that no significant learning occurs without a significant relationship, whether you're in poverty or not, but especially in poverty, if you come from poverty. Because what's the motivation? Right? You don't want to let someone down, and so you work like you've never worked before, either at school or the workplace. You don't want someone that you really love, trust, admire. You don't want to let them down, no matter what. You don't want to let them down. Whether it's a coach, counselor, supervisor, whatever it may be. So the relationship takes on an incredible meaning. Some quotes here. Locate a resilient kid and you'll also find a caring adult or several who has guided him. And this is a great one by Jean-Baptiste de La Salle. You must imitate God to some extent, for he loved the souls he created. Every day you have poor children to instruct, love them tenderly, following in this and the example of Jesus Christ. And it's not always easy, the work we do. The key to achievement for students from poverty is creating relationships. The most significant motivator for students from poverty is relationships. So if you take nothing else away today, that's a start. So use that relationship as a leverage point, and if you don't feel you have that relationship yet, start building it today. And I can't emphasize this enough. Mutual respect, and this is the code we live by at Cristo Rey. Mutual respect is high expectations, insistence, and support. Those three. And it's the same thing in the workplace. We eat, sleep, and breathe these words. Do not lower your expectations. High expectations, insist that it's done right, and support that student to get there, whatever that looks like, right? So I went to visit a student in the workplace a couple years ago, remarkable supervisor. This was a student who struggled. Unfortunately, he's no longer at the school. The student didn't do the task correctly. It was a major task. The supervisor blocked out an hour, did the job right herself, showed the student every step of the project, and said, now, I want you to do it. I'm not going to let you do it this way. Was it okay? Was it adequate? Yeah, but it wasn't up to her expectation. And so we're faced with that every single day, whether it's the classroom or the workplace. This is the standard. This is the bar. And it's easy to feel sorry for students. Oh, they're having a bad day. We're going to let them off this time. We can't do that. And so here at school, we say, nope, you got to do it again. I'll show you what it looks like, I'll support you to get there, but I'll insist that you do it and do it until you get it right. It has to be the same way in the workplace. Because once we allow a student to not meet the expectation, then they say, well, I've had low expectations, people have had low expectations in the past, and that's why they're multiple grade levels behind, right? And so that's really, really important. So due to time, I just want you to think in your own mind, I'm not gonna ask you to share this time, but think about a task that you ask your student worker or workers to do. What are your expectations for the task? And do you always insist that those are met, your expectations? And how do you support that student if they don't meet the expectation? How do you support them to meet that expectation consistently? Not just once, but consistently. And this is the challenge, because we say, oh, well, they have a lot of difficult things happening in their life. That's true. Our students face immense struggles. But if we lower our expectations and don't insist, we move away from the relationship of mutual respect. And that mutual respect is important. Time and time again, I hear students talk about teachers, and they say, man, that teacher's hard. But you learn. You learn in there. Man, I hated that teacher for a while, but now I love them. And they're the ones that they're hugging on graduation day. And the same thing with supervisors. I love this quote. Michael Gerson used this phrase, the soft bigotry of low expectations. And it's a pretty powerful statement, but if you have low expectations, it is a soft bigotry, and we can't do it. It says, how will you and your colleagues avoid this bigotry in your everyday work? And that's by always insisting that our students perform and meet those expectations. So here's the Cristo Rey Network's point of view, and this is really our point of view as a team. One of the most amazing things about this mission is that I go to graduation day and I see a lot of you there. By show of hands, how many people have had a student graduate that you've worked with? That is the most amazing thing, because when you go on that graduation day, and even if you don't, please come to graduation this year. You will see tears and celebration like you've never seen. Waterworks. Holy cow. Because everyone knows the struggles that have come along the way. Everyone. And everyone can say, oh, it hasn't always been easy. But the Cristo Rey Network's point of view is that it's just simply, I won't read them all to you, but you can kind of get the sense by reading these important bullet points. This is our audacious mission. This is what we do every day. It's remarkable. And the mission and vision of Cristo Rey, and you are right there, and the reason I put this up is that the work study program and the work supervisors are right there in the mission and the vision of Cristo Rey. It says, by providing students an extraordinary college prep education and a unique 4-year integrated corporate work study experience, we seek to help transform urban America. And it is. The president of Cristo Rey Cleveland, St. Martin de Porres, Rich Clark, who's the founder of the school, I think they were the second or third Cristo Rey school that opened following Chicago Pilsen. He refers to, I always love to tell the story, he refers to the corporate work study program as the special sauce of the Cristo Rey program. Because he's like, there's something about that program that allows our students to walk away with something that it's hard to measure, but it helps our students to succeed. So think about this. Our students get into college and persist at something of, I think, 86% from freshman year of college to sophomore year of college, about 86%. Our demographic, the national average, is about 10%. And they do that. They persist from the first year of college to the second year of college, despite the fact that their ACT scores and their general academic standardized testing is very, very low. Incredibly low. And yet they persist. We have students that are succeeding and doing remarkable things. And Rich talks about the special sauce, and he says, it's that sauce. There's something about that program, because without it, there's got to be something about it that helps our students succeed in college, and we think there is. In fact, they've just recently talked about undertaking a study to really try to find out what it is about the corporate work study program. They believe that because students are put into an environment that they're completely unfamiliar with, they're having to work in these middle class hidden rules and norms of the workplace. They're having to interact with adults, strangers, people that they may be initially terrified of, or this environment that they're initially terrified of. When they walk onto a college campus, they're like, professors in this college campus, we have to go work at a corporate internship job for 4 years. This isn't a big deal. They learn how to ask when they have work that they need to do, etc. So think of yourself, it's a high special sauce. Rich Clark always he always uses food analogies. He's a very interesting and funny guy, but maybe someday you'll get to meet him. I just want to plug one more book before I wrap up. In your packet, you have an excerpt from this book, and I wasn't sure if we would have time to read it. I was pretty sure we wouldn't, actually. But I wanted you to take it away with you. And this book by Carol Dweck, has anyone read this? Yeah, it's phenomenal. And it is all about the fixed versus the growth mindset. And it basically talks about there's two mindsets, growth and fixed. And the growth mindset, the educator believes that the growth of intellect and talent is about high standards for all students and putting forth effective effort. It is a very inspirational book. I would recommend it to everyone, and you have an excerpt to take away with you. So we are out of time. You have a ticket out, which I'll let you do, and it is also in your packet. And I'd like you to just process, just briefly on your way out today, 3 key points about the culture of poverty. We call this a 3-2-1. 2 ways that you can support your student workers, and 1 question you still have about the culture of poverty. And I'm about 1 minute over. Best wishes for ongoing success and the important work you do with your students. Anyone from C.H. Robinson here? I put that picture up there, but I guess no one's here from there. But anyway, here are a couple of our amazing students in the workplace. So hopefully you had something to take away this morning, and I really appreciate your time, and I cannot understate how much we appreciate the work you do every day with our students. Thank you.